This Bible question is an excerpt from our television program, What Do the Scriptures Say? We hope that it will enrich your spiritual life, and we hope that you'll come back to www.scripturesay.com to find answers to your Bible questions. Thank you.
And we'll start out by looking at a passage of Scripture in Matthew 22 and verse 21. It says, "They said to him, 'Caesar's,' and he said to them, 'Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.'" I know you've heard this one. About this time of year, people say it frequently, don't they?
Income tax time.
We're to give to God and the IRS, and it was interesting that Jesus uses that analogy. The Jews thought of the Romans as not only heathens and dogs, but as they despised the Roman officials and did not feel an obligation to pay their rightful taxes to them. So it's rather remarkable that Jesus goes against the political wisdom, politically correct thought, and says, "You render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." Here's one, salt of the earth. You ever use this expression about people?
Mm-hmm.
He's
certainly. That guy's a real salt of the earth.
Salt of the earth, and by that you mean he's
genuine, down to earth, honest, trustworthy.
And it comes from Matthew chapter 5 and verse 13, in which Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." And we do. We do use this expression to talk about someone who is a person of integrity. Salt was a very important item in the first century for the preservation of food, and salt always had, you take salt out of your food, see what happens. Just a little bit of salt makes it palatable. A salt-free diet, I know folks that cheat on that all of the time, figure out ways. Salt has influence for good as far as the palate is concerned. Here's another one that I think is used frequently, scapegoat.
Political, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear it on the news, don't you?
Yeah, that guy's
he's going to, you know where it originated?
The Bible.
All right, isn't that amazing? Here we are, and what do the Scriptures say? It originated in Luke 16. On Luke 16, wait a minute.
This is an Old Testament idea.
Leviticus 16.
There you go.
Leviticus chapter 16. The Day of Atonement was the day in which forgiveness was granted to the nation of Israel for their sins. Sometimes you'll hear Christians talk about sins of omission and commission. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, but on the Day of Atonement, there was a sacrifice for sins. And this expression has reference to the ram that was brought forward, and the priest would stand before all Israel. All Israel would be gathered to witness this thing. He would place his hands on the top of the ram's head, and then he would slit its throat in the presence of all. Some of the blood would be gathered and thrown on what's called the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, which the New Testament calls the propitiation. That's the actual Greek word. It means literally satisfactory sacrifice. So the scapegoat was the one that paid the penalty for sins. Now I've heard people talk about it in political circles. He's the one who's going to suffer for the wrongs of others. Maybe he had some part in it, but he's not really the one that's really responsible. And certainly, in talking about sacrifices, the animal was not the sinner. It was the people that were the sinners. Here's one that I suggest you will work every single time. See if you've heard this expression. A soft answer turns away wrath.
Yes.
Proverbs 15 and verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. This is a jewel. See if you can do this. When somebody is extremely harsh with you, see, just put this one to the test. Oh, it works so wonderfully, and you feel so good about it. And it usually is not what the one who is filled with wrath is expecting, but it works. Now, Danny, I'm going to have you, I want you to pronounce this one for me.
Sibboleth. I don't have my glasses on, but it looks like Sibboleth. You're holding it
There
far
you
enough
go.
away.
It's interesting to know Danny needs to wear glasses.
Sibboleth.
Sibboleth. Ever heard this one used?
No. What is...
One time I've heard it used. Might be good to stick this one in your conversation. See if you can raise the level of the intellect in the conversation. Let's look at the passage and I'll show you. Judges chapter 12 and verse 6. Then they would say to him, say now, Sibboleth. But he would say, let me back up and say, I mispronounced it. Here it is. They would say to him, say now, Shibboleth. But he said, Sibboleth, for they could not pronounce it correctly. Then they seized him and threw him at the fords of the Jordan. Thus there fell at that time 42,000 of Ephraim. This was used by Jephthah, and I would have failed the test. Because at Gilead, when at the Jordan River, the Ephraimites, which were the enemies of God's people, could not pronounce the SH. And so when he said to them, say now Shibboleth, they would say Sibboleth. And so they knew who the enemy was, because after all, they look the same, they act the same.
Is it like when in World War II, the Japanese can't struggle to say an L?
Yeah, and the way that we use it, yeah, it's in Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, Spanish Americans have difficulty with certain sounds in the English language, and you know, you can tell where an accent is coming from. This is used derisively to speak about another group's catchword or rally cry. It's their Sibboleth. And I have heard that used in that sense. Not recently, though. It seems that as the Bible becomes less and less familiar with certain cultures and groups, then some of these expressions fade into obscurity. But let's revive them. Let's bring them back. Here's one I know you've heard: spare the rod and
spoil the child.
Yeah. Right out of Proverbs 13, verse 24. He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. And we often talk in those same terms about a child who may be a little bit out of control, who has not been disciplined properly. And we won't get into corporal punishment here in detail, but and certainly abuse is never never tolerated, never excused. Here's one I know you use. I think I've even heard you use this before. Strain at a gnat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get the details. You get the details just right. Never mind about the overall big picture, but get those details right.
Matthew 23 and verse 24. Let's just have some fun. I wonder what he was talking about. Do you have any idea what?
He was climbing all over the Pharisees because they were arguing about the letter of the law.
Yeah.
And missing the overall fundamental concept. They were trying to get the detail, but missed the picture.
This would cure me of drinking wine, I'm sure. In the first century, they had to strain their wine to get the impurities out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever swallowed a gnat before, but it's I lose my appetite when things like that happen. And that's what he's talking about. He's so careful. So very careful to get those little details. You tithe cumin and dill. Get that down. But the overall principles to love your neighbor as yourself and love God, put God first, those don't seem to be as significant. So, yeah, people who are meticulous over insignificant things and yet important things they overlook. Well, I'm going to hurry through these because we have a couple of other questions. There's 30 pieces of silver. Here's one that 30 pieces of silver, a reference to the price of betrayal of Christ, and I hear people say things like, occasionally, it's amazing what somebody will do for 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
Thorn in the flesh. Heard that one used much?
Oh, that's my thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2 Corinthians 12:7 says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. A continual problem is a thorn in the flesh, and Paul had a number of thorns in the flesh. He'd been beaten and stoned and left for dead, and in this place, I believe, in 2 Corinthians, I believe he's actually indicating some difficulty that he has with his health as a result of those things, and that is his thorn in the flesh. Through a glass darkly. Ever hear that one used in a secular way?
No.
It comes from 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12. For now we see in a mirror dimly. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul is talking about, it's the love chapter. In the latter part of that, he talks about the things that will cease when the complete revelation, when the perfect comes, which is the Word of God in the context. We don't see, during the process of revelation, we can't see how everything is to fit together because we don't have a complete revelation, but when the revelation is completed, these spiritual gifts will cease and we will see clearly. Ecclesiastes has another one I'm sure you've heard of, a time to be born and a time to die. As a matter of fact, years before I became a Christian, and there was a Byrds song, and I was familiar with the Byrds, the group, very closely. I was impressed. I wondered where did that rhyme come from? To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season. Came from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning verse 1. There's an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every great event under heaven, a time to give birth, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot what is planted. Those of you unfamiliar with Ecclesiastes chapter 3, you might find this really interesting. It has led to many poets lifting out of the text ideas. Turn the other cheek is a good one in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 38. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. You need to learn how to turn the other cheek. The valley of the shadow of death is another one that's rather interesting. Vanity of vanities. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 2. All is vanity, says the preacher. Or here's the last one we'll look at. The voice of one crying in the wilderness. Have you ever felt like you were all alone? The only one who was concerned about this, that, or the other thing, it actually is a scriptural expression. Isaiah 40 in verse 3 will use the prophecy that says, a voice calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. And Jesus uses this expression to refer to John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 3. John the Baptist was the fulfillment of this prophecy in Isaiah 40 and verse 3. And John was literally the lone voice calling Israel into the proper relationship to God in his day. And the last one, we go to W. We don't have any Z's, but walk on water.
I've heard that used both positively and negatively.
Yeah.
That guy thinks he can walk on
Yeah.
water, or that guy walks on water.
What is that? Yeah. I've heard it used to refer to people. Well, about a child, for example, the mother thinks that he walks on water.
Yeah, yeah.
What is it a reference to? It's Matthew chapter 14, as well as the parallel passages where Jesus walks on water, demonstrating his deity. It's not possible without the aid of flotation devices to walk on water. I suppose you could call barefoot skiing walking on water, but that you're using an aid, a speedboat to pull you at a speed that actually allows you. But you understand what I'm saying, and it is interesting, isn't it, that when you talk about someone who is highly favored or someone who may think that they can walk on water, who may have a deity complex. Well, those are all of the expressions that we have time for in these 4 episodes.
We thank you for your interest in What Do the Scriptures Say. We hope that you'll come back to scripturesay.com often for answers to your Bible questions. See you then.